everyone. Welcome to another interesting episode of the Shaft podcast. Today's discussion would be about something really unique and important to the way in which the world is shaping up. And throughout history, there have been a lot of important people who have spoken to this issue. Way back in the days of Plato, where he said, "Those who tell stories are the ones who rule the world." Research by Harvard said if you pick people who have read Harry Potter, they marginally believe that they can move things with their mind more than ordinary people would. If you pick people who have read The Vampire, they sort of have a sense that their teeth is slightly longer than that of the average person. Chimamanda, who is a famous African writer, also said the power of a single story is what creates stereotypes. And stereotype is not a problem because it is untrue. It's a problem because it tells only one story and eventually makes that one story become the truth. She also said power is rested in those who are able to distribute stories, dictate when those stories are told, how they are told, and who tells them. But finally, our guest here also made a profound statement about storytelling and how unique it is. And he said that the stories we tell today have to change because we cannot build a society today on lessons of yesterday. Essentially, we need to be futuristic in the kind of stories that we tell people and reflective of the goals we have in today's world. Today, on this episode, we have Dominic, popularly known as Kachi by majority of the people within the African debate circuit. Dominic has been an immense person within the debate space, winning the PADC Public Speaking Trophy in 2019, which shows the quality that he exhibited within that period as well. But Dominic has had a profound impact on the African community beyond the debating space. And today he's here to discuss with me what he saw as a problem within society, and then generally around the power that the stories we tell in societies and to our children hold. Welcome, Dominic. How are you feeling now?
Oh, I'm very, very good. Thank you very much for having me, Andres. And that was a fantastic opening. Uh, yeah, thank you very much. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I mean, before we started, we were talking about the last time we met within debate, which was 4 years ago at PADC 2019. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to ask, how did you feel about winning the PADC Public Speaking Trophy? Because around that time, I was very terrible at public speaking. I probably still am. And so I never thrived within that competition. But how did you feel about it? And did it feed into subsequent motivations that you had in decisions that you made afterwards?
I can say it's like one of those things that were unplanned for because I
Okay.
remember I was never supposed to participate in the public speaking.
Oh, wow.
So what happened was like one of the people that joined, Asha, he was supposed to do the public speaking.
Yeah.
He had an emergency at home and he had to appear for a job interview the next day. So it was either debate or a job interview. So he had to fly back to Nigeria immediately. So I just took the spot and like ran by it because I remember we are focusing on the debate at the time. So I
Yeah.
think at the end of the day, it was quite something because when you get to be the best in Africa at anything, it's quite a feeling to have, right? It
Yeah.
means that at least some of like the work you've put in, some of the grand total of all your efforts you've put in training and trying to develop yourself has come to the forebearing. So there's obviously that brief moment where there is happiness, where there is sense of accomplishment, when
Yeah.
there's a sense of forgiveness, especially knowing coming from Covenant University, where they had not really been known in like the African debate circuit at that point. So I think for me, the biggest thing I expected it to do was to obviously unlock more debate funding for my club as at then, which we tried, and I think which was what we eventually got to happen. So, yeah, it was a mixture of all those things. It was unexpected, but it was well received.
Yeah, yeah. I usually see, like, I enjoy public speaking, to be fair, especially the rendition that we have. I think from like 4 or 5 years back, where it's now about speaking to constructive issues within society, exhibiting or simulating like high profile environments like business pitches, where people now have to think and exhibit issues about highlighting things like scaling, financing, which are really important to sort of think about, especially as people who are also trying to break into businesses, into other spaces of life as well. And talking about businesses, you founded a couple of startups. One of them is Akiddie, which I think for a lot of us within the debate community, eventually that's what we came to know you for. Just to give us a sense of the story behind it, what struck you? What motivated you towards that path?
Um, I think it was an encounter with my niece.
Yeah,
I was living with my sister then, I think 2017, 18, 2018 actually, that was when we started. I was living with my sister then, and then something happened. One day I was asked to read a story for my niece, and
yeah,
then I went to, she had this mini a shelf of books in her pink room then, and then she had all these books. So I went through these books. There was Cinderella, there was Rapunzel, there was from Tilted Skin, there were like a couple of books from Dr. Seuss, all the good stuff,
yeah,
growing up. But I think then it stopped me, right? And I didn't particularly think that the literature she was reading was problematic. I thought that the literature she was reading was incomplete, right? So
yeah,
yeah, there's a world where you have all those other stories where the characters don't look like you, which is an important education to have for the world, because the world is not filled with people that look like you. You should be
yeah,
aware, be respectful of the presence of other people, right? But there is a world where the world is constructed as something you do not live in, and then everything in the world that is there is now aspirational. You are
yeah,
almost being put out as a character looking into the world where, oh, all the princesses are white and the hair is flowing, and they live in a faraway land, speaking, eating things you don't do. They have things like winter, they have things like summer, and you're a young girl growing up in Lagos, and all you've seen in your life is the rain and the sun, right? So
yeah,
there is that kind of like conflict when the literature was not kind of complete, and that was something I found problematic. But initially I just assumed it was, oh, maybe the mom did not think to buy those African written books. Then I asked the mom, and she was like, oh, she tried to find, but she's tried to buy, but she could not find. And I thought, oh, probably she did not look well enough, right? And then I remember going into the market on that day in Balogun, and then we searched round and searched round and searched round. And it was, I think, only in one bookshop that we were able to like find stories that were written by Nigerian authors targeted at children. It's possible that I missed a lot of others, right? But
yeah,
it just then struck me how difficult it was to like find these things, because it was hard to find online as at then 2018. There have been
yeah,
quite a few come up after then right now. And it was also hard to find in the market. So I was like, why not? Let's just make the story. I had a very good friend then, still my very good friend Tolu, who was an illustrator. And then I wrote the first story, he illustrated it. We put the writing and the illustration together, displayed it on the tab to my niece, and she loved it. When she
yeah,
went, showed her classmates, and they loved it as well. And that was when it occurred to us that like what we just did could be done for like many much more people, and that was when we decided to like build the first platform. But I think all along it was like quite the experience, like finding a
yeah,
problem, then trying to casually solving the problem, and then arriving at that moment where you say, oh, the solution for this problem can be scaled, right?
yeah,
Because then what we did was that we looked around the world and we saw that the world was rapidly changing. People are moving around and growing up in communities that are different from the ones where they originated from. But there
yeah,
is nothing as important as a person's story, like as their identity. Their identity is tied with the stories they've had, or the stories of their people, where they come from, who they are, right? Those things speak to a person's identity. And then we saw around the world and saw that these communities are springing up everywhere. There are Indians everywhere in the world. Nigerians have moved everywhere in the world, and the world is becoming increasingly more global. And then we thought, is it possible that in the midst of all this migration, in the midst of all this highly mobile world where people are like getting farther and farther from like where they come from, that there might be a demand for stories that affirm the
oh,
children, stories that
yeah,
sort of like show them those children the way, stories that like bring the identity of the children back to them. And that was what we thought that the online platform we do, right? So the idea was that if we built a marketplace, then creators
yeah,
of children's content, no matter where they are able to like reach scattered and distributed minority communities wherever they might be distributed across the world. So if
yeah,
you're a Nigerian writer and you're writing children's stories for Nigerian kids, You could find Nigerian people in the UK, the US, Canada to sell those things to. If you're Indian, if you're Sri Lankan, and we also felt that those things could be extended, right? It could also be
Yeah,
religious, right? So if you need the kind of culture that affirms your faith in a country your faith is a minority, how are you able to find a diverse place where you're able to like find all those things? So could we build a pipeline around the world to connect people back to like where their primary cultures and identities come from? And I think that was the idea that
yeah,
made us that. So we developed the first bunch of books. We built the platform. We put it on a platform. We built and put it on an app. It was quite an experience, to be honest.
yeah.
Learning, going back and iterating, and until we decided to shut down Akiddie, it was like quite the experience going from. I think we started it when we were in 300 level, and then we ran it until we graduated from school. So it was a decent and handy learning opportunity in school as well.
Yeah, yeah. Just to narrow down a little bit into the storytelling aspect and the fact that
Mhm.
children didn't have access to these stories. Beyond the lack of the stories themselves, I think maybe one of the things you also highlighted in some sense is also the ability for people to relate to it. Did this involve language in terms of whether or not kids could relate to English? And I know sometimes in Nigeria, in Ghana, in African countries, some not all children would have access to very good English education at the very basic level, and so sometimes they struggle to consume some of these books. Did you discover a problem on the language front as well? And did that inform some of the books you were writing in terms of the language within which you were writing them in?
Yeah, when you talk about connecting people to their culture, it's
Yeah,
encompassing of everything, right? It's encompassing of the stories, and it's encompassing of the languages with which those stories were told, right? And
yeah,
it's also encompassing of like the food and like
yeah,
the dressing where they come from, right? So with Akidi, we did not discriminate as to oh you had to have it in English. We're like as long as you believe that there's someone out there that could buy it from you, we just upload it on this platform, sell it, and then we'll pay you when that person pays, right? So we
okay,
had books called languages. We had books in Hausa, Igbo, Yoruba, English. At least I'm sure of those four, and I think a couple of other languages turn up in the portal. And I think the languages turned out to be quite a hit because in some certain areas they were like, oh, this is the first time I could find like a collection of books in Igbo.
yeah,
For kids, especially as someone that obviously I stay at home, I stay abroad, I work, I want to speak as much Igbo like as I can to my kids, but when I'm out going at work, what kind of content can I trust that they listen for to, right?
yeah,
Or maybe I'd rather them listen to something, a story that was told in Igbo, because that's the kind of content I think they should grow up hearing. So there was also that expression. But I think Akidi as a whole was like, it was the expression of culture and ways in which we could connect those expressions to the people that wanted it, right? Whether for themselves or whether for them children or even for educational purposes. Because we had this teacher from Canada write to us and say, "Oh, we love your stories. It's not because we have African kids in our school. Our school is predominantly filled with like just white kids, but we
yeah,
love your stories because they were able to like find stories that gives an alternate perspective to the universe, to the world that they were living in, right? So
yeah,
it's like crafting a story that intentionally breaks everything that they were used to reading, and like that fresh perspective was like good for her students, and it was something that we got quite often too. So I think, yeah, in a lot of ways, it was in the language. It was also in a couple of other things that we did by building that platform and the
yeah.
possibilities we had, of course.
I mean, this is really amazing. I just have maybe two spin-off questions from these.
Sure.
First question would be, in the absence of these stories, for instance, when your sister asked you to find books for her child to read, and then you couldn't find anyone to the liking of an African story, in environments where those depictions are absent, what do you think happens to the identities, to the mindset of the kids, the individuals who tend to then have to consume content that do not reflect in any way who they are, present the world to them as if they are excluded from it, and then constantly just show them external perspectives that are external to themselves rather than one that include them? What do you think it does to us as individuals?
I think the most important thing you can give someone is confidence, right? And
Yeah.
assurance. And it's from confidence that a lot of other virtues can like come up, right?
Yeah.
It's in being confident that you learn how to trust yourself, to be
Yeah.
wise. You understand? And I think the danger when a story is incomplete, or when the content people read are like narrow, is
Yeah.
that like you paint a world where all the things that can happen look a certain kind of way, and
Yeah.
because they don't look that way, then they probably are not deserving of the things, or they are probably as not as imaginative as they
Yeah.
can be. So he told the story of Spider-Man right now, and it's a white blonde guy.
Yeah.
A young boy growing up that's white probably could believe anytime that he could do anything just like
Yeah.
Spider-Man can, right?
Yeah.
Like that confidence to believe that he can do, and they're finding out and trying is very, very important. But in a world where all the Spider-Mans don't look like me, um what is there for me in a way? Like
Yeah.
I it's a very troubling thing, especially because like if you looked at the way the world is structured now, and the way it's the narratives that drive the world that also determine a lot of the things we do and how we interact with each other in society, you'll
Yeah.
see why like the absence of these stories, not just for the people that look like me, but also for the people that don't look like me, is problematic, right?
Yeah.
Because it creates a world where the narratives are not as empowering for everybody as they should be, right? They are not as inclusive for everybody as they should be, but much more importantly, they are not as complete as they should be. And because they are not as complete, we can misunderstand each other. So,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, for me, like having a place where these stories were not only available but easy to find meant that like it was much easier to break out of like that echo chamber, right? It was much easier to find alternative narratives, and the ease was not just for the people that look like me or for the African children all around the world that are looking for African stories to reaffirm them. It's also for the white kids who need to know that like there are other people that look like these, and they are good, they are okay, they are normal, right? They are just like you in a way.
Yeah.
It's something you have to tell people. And there are other stories that come from other places in the world that don't sound like the stories that you have heard growing up, but they are just as valid, they are just
Yeah.
as good. There are also lessons that you can pick up from those stories that come from like these other places in the world. So that ability to like have an open mind for the people that don't look like me, and then to have a door into like a world of imagination for people that
Yeah.
look like me, I thought was very, very important.
I mean, this is really interesting because I have sort of a similar personal experience to this. Maybe not in the grand scheme of how the world works, but like growing up as a young teenager, I was separated from a lot of public engagement. So I wasn't outgoing, I wasn't mingling with friends. So I wasn't rolling with guys to know what is happening in the world. Like, how are teenagers of today behaving? I close from school and I'm just within my room and I'm sort of shut off from that version of the world. And then eventually I start to have to catch up with it. And then I started realizing that the world is not as straightforward as I thought it was, because in my small world, all I thought was the way in which I respond to things, or the way in which the few people around me respond to things, was what I was expecting everybody to be doing once I stepped out there, which sort of resonates the power of information that you're exposed to the way in which you approach the world, and whether or not there are consequences to some of the things that you would do without having the complete picture of how the world works. And for me, there were some times where it came with consequences. They were not huge, they were minor. For instance, maybe misinterpreting somebody's actions, not understanding what a jargon means or something. But then for the discussion we are having now, it tells you that there are sometimes much bigger consequences to not being exposed to a complete set of information, not just for the person who is not reflected in that conversation, but also for the person who only thinks that they are the only entities who are reflected in the world in all of those instances, which is really, really unique here. I just want to then ask the second follow up to this, which is in a world where we weren't publishing our stories or we weren't writing them and making them available, did you notice a trend where other people were then writing the stories and telling them on our behalf, but then telling them in ways that were unrepresentative of who we truly were?
Obviously, that was bound to happen, right?
Yeah,
It's a free market, right? If there's a story to be told, no one is telling it, and it's a story that can pique interest. Someone is going to try to like have a stab at it, right?
yeah,
Um, then the thing is that, but it's not as simple as that, right? Storytelling also requires competence,
yeah,
and storytelling also requires capital,
yeah,
and storytelling also requires it also requires distribution, access to something that can distribute it to people that
yeah,
may be interested in like having this, right?
yeah,
So the trends where people were like taking up African stories were and doing it was like I think it was as economical as it was like non representative in a way.
yeah,
It was
yeah,
economical because oh, there was a motive to do it and there was money to be made, but it was not representative because it was simply not accurate, right? The
yeah,
problem with that is that those kinds of stories don't come with disclaimers. They don't tell you that these are pure imaginations.
yeah,
They they always tell you that oh, this is the way it was, and there's this fetishized, especially with the storytellings about Africa. There is
yeah,
this fetishized mirror mother Africa that they want
yeah,
to talk about. It aligns with what their market wants to like buy, right? So I think it's like on both ends, right? But demand is what pulls in the capital to like create the kind of things that we want. So if people are telling our stories and they are selling it to us, then it means that the demand is from us, right? And then we
yeah,
should just choose who to buy from better, right? But if people
yeah,
are telling our stories and selling it to other people, dangerous still. It just means that there is an opportunity or there's a demand for those things there, and it should like encourage us to like pull. And in a lot of ways, that's like what we try to do, right? We're like, oh, we can't tell all the stories for everybody, so we've built a platform where people looking for these types of stories can come and meet the people that are selling these types of stories, right? And then the type of story you're looking for, as long as there are enough people looking for this type of story, then there should be a creator out there that is willing to tell it. And the odds are that that creator is probably closer to that story than you could get. And that was something I found was like really, really important. It was like reducing that barrier so that there is less need for, obviously, there's still the need for competence to tell a story, but
yeah.
probably the economic barrier is not there as much.
Okay. We'll come back to this in a bit. But before we return to it, I want to just find out how difficult, because you mentioned that you eventually had to shut down Akiddie and then move on from it. But generally, how difficult, because you've also founded multiple startups, how difficult is it to found a startup and scale it and sustain it in Nigeria, in Africa, on a general level?
It's I think startups are interesting. Like, obviously, I've never seen a startup that was easy, right?
Yeah,
If it's easy to start, it won't be easy to run. If it was easy to run, it won't be easy to start.
yeah,
Sometimes it's not easy to start and it's not easy to run. So it
yeah,
was quite difficult, but in a lot of ways, we were not. I didn't feel as if it was difficult because it was just a problem we're interested in, and then we were not trying to solve it for everybody at once. We were just picking up one problem at a time, solving it. So found out if we found out we were wrong, sorry, we'll take a step back, try again, right? So it didn't really feel difficult while at it, but maybe in retrospect, seeing all the things we had to do, registering the startup, trying to look for investments, building the platform, sponsoring the marketing, trying to like get the word out there, trying to like coordinate with creators to get them to upload, trying to like get the users to stay. Obviously, those things don't look as easy
yeah,
right now,
yeah.
but in the moment, it did not feel difficult because I think we're really working on a problem we enjoyed.
Okay. You mentioned funding challenges, and I read in one of the articles that were published about Akidi, about Akidi winning the Global Entrepreneurship Week. I think there was a challenge there that you won a significant amount of money at the time, and then you couldn't reach the organizers. They ghosted you after the event, and then funding was no more. And then that struck a nerve because I look at that and I'm like, this is probably also one of the, not just that single incident, but maybe one of the reasons why projects such as Akidi, who identify some of the problems that I feel are probably much more fundamental to the way in which the African community is being shaped. Because, like you said, confidence and believing in yourself, that mental freedom that it comes with, is much more empowering to transfer into every single space you work in than one single skill set that you are given, right? And maybe that's, I see some of these hiccups as some of the reasons why startups such as Akidi, who target some of these far more fundamental problems to deal with them, are not surviving for the long term, because then they face such hiccups like this. And so I want to know whether this was a one-time thing. Was it frequent that Akidi was having challenges raising funds and capital, and how did you manage to go through within that period as well in terms of financial support from investors?
For financial support for investors, we mostly had family and friends and grants we won from UNCAP,
Okay.
which was a German company that was giving grants for. So Akidi was built on, I think, $15,000, $5,000 in support from friends and family, and then $10,000 from UNCAP spread over a 2 3 year period. So
Okay.
it's not that we had $15,000 at one point in time.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was the GEW that we won, and then we just did not hear from them afterwards.
Yeah.
And then there was they're reaching out to investors. I think it couldn't quite work because we're still students.
Yeah.
I think we had a bit of credibility issues, and plus the business, to be fair, was more social than it was practical as a business. It was probably
Yeah.
another thing that we had to like learn. It was a lot more. It had more social benefit than it was profit oriented. So
Economic.
it was not like giving a lot of green lights to people that are a lot more strict when it comes to like the kind of things that they wanted to invest in. But yeah, I think those things are incredibly possible in Africa. Starting a startup in Africa is hard, obviously. Getting funded for that startup is even harder. Hats off to everyone that has been able to pull it off, both those that failed and those that succeeded. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Down the line, we'll talk about how this and some of the challenges you faced there informed certain steps you took in the other startups that you are currently working on.
Mhm.
But for now, I also want to know, you know, the thing about trying to evolve into a technology world is that it requires people to have access to that technology to begin with. And so for us Africans, there are also lots and lots of people who have network challenges, who have difficulty understanding mobile technology devices, mobile technology platforms, which, like you say, today, even beyond Akidi, almost every single resource you would probably be able to use to build yourself and break maybe information that previously in the previous generation you would not access if you weren't physically close to it. Now you can access. But then the problem we have with some African communities is that there's a significant challenge in people being able to use these technological tools and devices, and even sometimes being able to access them. Did that affect the way in which Akidi could scale? Because, like you're saying, it's more social than economic. But I also sort of understand that one of the things that informs economic benefits, even if you are trying to maybe minimize price and expense, is also maybe the quantity of people that you can have access to. So that if the customer base is huge, even if you go on a low price, you can reasonably manage the cost benefits as well. Was that a challenge that significantly hindered the scaling capacity of Akidia as a business?
No, not really. And the reason being that a lot of our customers were targeted in the diaspora where those things were not
Oh,
issues. So
okay.
the idea was that you get the creators there to create the content, and then you export those contents to like more developed markets where they could pay higher fees for them. And then the children in those developed markets, I'm talking about children in Nigeria, children of Nigerian descent in Canada, UK, USA, and other maybe European and Southeast Asian countries. They didn't quite have the problem with internet and connectivity as the people here. But even amongst the children here, I think at around 2018, 2019, the penetration like was quite high. So you could find like a decent, obviously not every child, but a decent amount of children with access to an internet and a device that they can use to like access the platform.
Yeah. So from Akiddie throughout that period, if I asked you, if I met you one day and said, Kachi, I'll probably be interested in going on the path you took Akiddie on. Tell
Mhm.
me your biggest lessons you learned from there, and what I should be looking out for. What would they be?
I think uh, I think first of all, I think it's an important problem. I think anybody out there that can still solve it and solve it at scale should give it
Yeah,
a try. So definitely going to be an encouragement to try. Secondly, I also think it's an expensive problem in a way. So you probably want to get funded to try and have like a chance of at success. And I think that's going to be the two things I say. And then thirdly, just be honest with your experimentation. Know when it's not working, switch.
yeah. I mean, that's really interesting because I also know there's this sunk cost thing where people find it difficult to leave a project they've put so much into, and the longer they stay in it, the more difficult it is to opt out
To
of it. Yeah, to quit even if it's not working. And that brings me to, how difficult was it for you to to shut down Akidi? Because I know, like you said, it took quite a significant effort and number of years out of you to try and grow it. When you were trying to make that decision to step off it and then pivot your energy and your resources somewhere else, did you ever have conflicting, like internal conflicts about, well, maybe I should try it for one more year or a few more months and see if I can do it? And at what point did you finally decide to break it off? I'm asking this because a lot of us, maybe including myself, and a lot of youth out there, usually, especially in Africa, tend to experiment a lot in terms of careers. So we may start on a path and then we may want to pivot to something else, but usually we are scared of letting go of whatever effort we've put into the current path we are on and then pivoting into something else. And that fear ends up keeping us there and preventing us from exploring. Maybe part of it is also because we do not have a lot of shock absorbers to back us up when we take risks and things go wrong. And so, for you, what was that period like? What was that decision making process like? And in general, what would you tell the youth or anybody out there who is also within that phase of pivoting between one field and another? At what point they should be bold enough to say, look, I'm changing the trajectory and I need to move on from this?
Um, for me, making the decision was about we're trying to like find a business model for Akiddie that was
Yeah.
not going to be as expensive as the one we had to run, and that was actually what led to founding Flock. Actually, so Flock was technically just like rebranded Akiddie for where we changed like the creator personas that we're going to play. So that's how we ended up founding Flock. So Flock was basically an extension of Akiddie, a fork of Akiddie
Okay.
that was supposed to like cater to like a different set of creators. But what we found out was that finding children was hard, right? Children don't
Okay.
have devices, so you have to market to
Yeah.
them through their parents,
Their parents.
and
Yeah.
parents don't are often not as motivated if it's not coming from their schools, and
Yeah.
then getting into schools were not particularly easy because we had a lot of like politics to play, and we're
Yeah.
just like three guys in the room where we did not have like the muscle to like do a lot of those things. So it was we're finding it quite hard to like get through. Obviously, we knew how we could get, but all the ways we knew were quite expensive and needed a substantial amount of capital, which we did not have. So we asked ourselves the question: if we could just fork Akidi, sorry, FORK,
Yeah.
basically like take a core and then build something new with it. It's not a bad word. If you could do that, what what are we going to do? And then what we did was that we said, okay, instead of allowing creators to be just creators of children's content, how about we make it that any type of creator can sell any type of thing on a platform? And that's how we started Akiddie and we started Flock and we
Yeah.
experimented for a year. more with Flock before we finally shut down. So if you ask me, it was actually the same product that I ran. It got to a point where it did a rebrand, kept running until we shut down.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, then to the latter part of the question, what do you think people should be looking out for when they have to make a decision to quit something they've invested so much in? Because I know how difficult it is, because I've had not maybe as significant as maybe starting a startup and putting in a lot of effort into it, but even as minute decisions as, do I stop this reading this program and go and read a different program? Or I've started this course and I've seen something else that I think maybe I'll have challenges here, but then I'm struggling to stop because maybe I've done 6 months already and I want to see it through rather than go and start another opportunity which I think it's equally important or maybe even has better prospects. But because I've put in some cost and effort here, I'm struggling to pivot. What generally, what do you think people should be considering within those conflicting situations? Because I think indecision is creating a lot of lag within the African space and sort of costing people a lot of opportunities
Yeah.
and the ability to bolden up and say, look, it's time, let me just pivot. What would you say should be some of the things people look out for in trying to resolve those conflicts?
I think the answer is slightly different from businesses than it is for individuals, right?
Yeah,
For business, for businesses, if it's not working and there is no sustainable sure path for it to start working without obviously investing a lot more money, which you do not have, then it's clear that you're at the end of the road, right? You've tried as much as you can and then you can call it a day. And for it can be for a lot of reasons. It might be because you did not try hard enough. It might be because the market realities do not support it. It might be because you are not really solving a problem. It might
yeah,
be because the problem, your solution to the problem was not actually what the user wanted. It can be for a lot of reasons. And then as a business, you want to try to like cross off a lot of these reasons before
yeah,
you get to the where you say, is it working or it's not working? So you want to be sure that you are trying the best you can try. You want to be sure you are running the leanest you can run. You want to be sure that you are stretching out each dollar for as long as you can, because the most important thing in business is right time, right?
yeah,
If you have time, you can survive. If you have time, you can put things on. And the way to buy time is by paying your bills. So you have to stretch
yeah,
every dollar. And then if it ever gets to the point where, oh, this business does not look like it's making more than it's giving, then I think it's time to like shut it down, try something else. But for careers, it's slightly different, right? For careers, I would say you should try not to regret anything, right?
okay,
So if you really, really want something and you know that's like maybe 10, 15 years from now, there's a high chance, a very, very big chance that you might regret not going after that thing. I think you should just go for it. Like, and a lot of the times it will not make sense to most other people, right?
yeah,
But at the end of the day, regret is personal, right? There
yeah,
might be community regrets, but regret is personal. Nobody's going to regret on your behalf, right?
yeah,
So you want to make sure that for all the things you want, you try, right? If you try and you do not get, then it's easy to make peace with I tried and I did not get. But not trying is what most people eat themselves up for. And I think for the most things you want, you should just go for it. Especially if it makes sense, right? If it's going to keep you comfortable and happy, why not? Sure.
that's pretty profound in terms of saying, like, just think about it whether or not you regret not going for it. And for me, usually I try to have bottom lines, like what should I be looking out for to help me make this decision, and I think having this also helps. I just want to ask, currently you are a product manager. What's the best part of your work?
Best part.
Yeah,
That's quite a tough one. Um, I think the best part of my work is that I get to create, right? Within certain and reasonable bounds, a product manager can imagine from nothing and command it into being, and it
yeah,
appears. You can adjust it from the design, from the engineering, and tailor it to whatever user you want to be. So I think for me is that like permission to create, the permission to make something out of nothing. Obviously, most product managers don't make things out of nothing. We
Yeah,
make things that somewhere with the information we got from somewhere, but that's like the game to play, right? Figuring out what pieces are going to fit and figuring out how to optimize this opportunity so that it drives the biggest returns in terms of helping users and making you money, but also ensuring that the people that work on executing those don't burn out while doing it. So
yeah,
balancing all those things and being able to like create something new and something helpful, something that can impact and change the lives of people is something I find remarkably interesting. Understand? Think about all the things that you use now, and devices that make your life better.
yeah,
It's probably uses imagination, and like the first place it starts, the guy that dreams it up, right? Before we
yeah.
get the design and the rest of it. So I think that's the best part, and then every other thing is tears.
Since every other thing is tears, but I don't know. For me, like the most exciting part of what you just described, which maybe I think people can find in different ways in their areas of work, is sort of being able to mentally position yourself in various diverse situations and diverse contexts as different consumers and sort of illustrate whether or not the product would appeal to you and what elements of that product should you have to appeal to you. And it's sort of very interesting because when I was at boat, it's one thing we used to discuss: how do we improve consumer experience? And one of the key things was imagine yourself as a consumer. And a lot of the time, we also fall into the position of consumers sometimes. Like I can step out and decide to order a boat ride, and all of a sudden I'm a consumer. And then I need to imagine myself from that perspective. How do I interact with this? And it's usually an exciting process, knowing, like trying to think, if I'm a woman, how would I react to this? If I'm a pregnant woman, how would I react to this? If I'm an old man, how would I react to this? And I think that's very powerful because, like you said, the thing about being able to imagine the world in other people's eyes is equally being able to understand them properly so we can all coexist and relate very uniquely with them. I'm sure there's a question everybody wants me to ask you, so I'm going to ask you. um, you did debate for quite a while, and you picked up a lot of things from debate. Has debate been influential in the career path you've taken? Are there elements of your work that you look at and then you say, I'm a lot better at this because I had a debating background? And what would you say is probably the best skills that you've picked up from debate after you left the space as well?
Oh, definitely. If you work as a product manager, there's a lot of communication, and the
Yeah,
communication also has to be clear sometimes. It has to be friendly sometimes. It has to be persuasive other times, depending on who you are talking to. It also has to be unambiguous sometimes, depending on who you are describing to. So, to the engineer, it has to be clear. To the user, it has to be unambiguous. To whoever is going to approve your project, it has to be persuasive. I think obviously those cadence of communication and being able to like do it on the go is one thing. It's one thing to be able to like be able to sit down and research a well-reasoned memo on this thing, and it's another thing to be able to also issue out a well-rationed justification on the call. So I think in both instances, the practice has really helped, especially seeing as it's something we did hundreds of rounds over
yeah,
like
yeah,
couple of years. So you kind of like build that kind of like proficiency in those kinds of things. It has definitely helped. Definitely. Another thing you have to do as a product manager is to analyze, right? To see how
yeah.
different innocently non-competing factors might play in the overall outcomes of things and to see what the consequences of those actions are. Another thing you want to do is to be able to predict. So all these are things you do when you are doing like meta-analysis in debates and a couple of other things, whether you're the PM, the DPM, or the LO and the M1 closing and all. So I think those are all very important skills, and it goes like way beyond that, to be honest. But I think like those are the key and the primary core ones.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to hear how, like, because usually we see debates to be very easy to transfer into certain areas of work. Like,
Hmm.
usually the normal perception is, if you're a politician and you debated, easy transfer because you are talking in one sense, you are talking in another, carry it and go. If you are a debater and you're a lawyer, which is a typical one, Everybody who
Mm,
sees that I debate ask me, Aren't you interested in law?" I'm like, "Yeah, why? Why does it always have to be law? Why does it always have to be law?" But people are able to transfer, or people are able to relate debate to certain professions very easily. One of the
mhm,
professions I know people aren't able to do that is the tech space. People
mhm,
generally don't feel that when you debate, it probably helps you in the tech space in any way, because they see
mhm.
tech as computer work and they see debate as talking over issues. And so, getting to, from your perspective as well, know how important debating is to some of the core things you do is really, really important and very, very exciting, because then for someone who listens to this who is interested in tech and probably has is questioning whether or not debate is even important for them, they now get to equally understand that you would be able to get something meaningful out of this in the long term.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think obviously debate helps, but another thing that was in my background that really helped was the fact that I read engineering in school.
yeah,
So I programmed and I did a lot of things. So I also had a fairly decent understanding of technical things, and I could converse in like communication. But obviously those things are learnable, right?
yeah,
So if you're a debater and you want to be a PM, I think you are going to do really, really good. Just settle down if you are not a tech native and learn. It's not particularly hard. You don't need to know how to write code. You just need to understand what people see when they talk about code, and it's quite easy to learn. It's not particularly for that much. So yeah, definitely.
that's interesting. Back to the conversation about stories, because I found out something which I didn't know up until I was researching for this episode, and then I found that out. Because I read, like, first of all, I'm a very lazy reader sometimes, so
Mhm.
I barely complete a book when I start. Usually I start. There are two books in my life I can count that I've started and completed, just two. So I don't read a lot, but then after finding out a few things, I sort of started questioning, is what we read that important to us? And it's like, I got to understand ways in which reading affects us, and I just wanted to pick your thoughts on some of them, and how you think about the way in which they affect us as individuals as well. I mean, you've mentioned this in terms of when you read, sort of you being able to insert yourself into that world, right? More like transport yourself into that world and then experience the things within that world. For me, what I see is that when you are reading and you are reading about people who are, whether people who are similar to you or people who are not similar to you, I don't know. For me, I just, okay, maybe also the books I've read have been very hypothetical ones about general humans rather than books about specific characters, right? And so, from your experience, do you find it difficult to go on that journey? For instance, picture yourself within that story, picture yourself experiencing that story. If the books you are reading do not reflect you and maybe your culture, your identity, and give you that space to transport yourself into that story.
Mm, Not really, not necessarily, but I think people read for a lot of reasons, right? And
Yeah,
we're not the only ones capable of telling good stories, right? So I think any well-written story should be able to capture anybody, no matter where that story was written and who is telling the story. And that's why the power of stories is that they are universal, right? That anywhere you tell a story, it's going to sound like a story. It's going to capture your imagination. It's going
yeah,
to string you out of the plot, and it's going to take you to the end it's planned for. So for me, naturally, I don't think representation was like a big thing in reading. But like again, it's if you have a medium of assimilation and there is only one type of thing that is there, is the thing that is incomplete, then it's incomplete. That's where the problem is. Not
oh,
necessarily if,
not,
oh yeah, being
yeah,
African is going to engender you to like finish reading the story. I think someone that finds the story interesting will find the story interesting, whether or not they represent them or not.
yeah. So this then leads me to the second question I have. What do you think are the most powerful storytelling tools in the modern age? Because during when I was growing up as a child, maybe not for long, but as a child, I know my dad used to do this where there are some musicians who tell stories within their music, right? Amachi Dede is a popular Ghanaian legend, music legend, who did that a lot.
Mhm.
And my dad used to make me sit and listen to these songs, listen to the stories within them, come back to him, retell, make sure I can retell those stories, and then tell him what I learned from these stories. And it made it easy for me because I loved music, right? So I could listen to the songs while listening to the story. And I hated reading, so he didn't force me to read storybooks. He knew I didn't. If you give me a storybook, I would just drop it. But if you force me to listen to 100 songs a day with stories, trust me, I can recount about 70 of those stories. In your experience, what do you think are some of the most powerful storytelling tools, especially when we are, like you said, we are gradually moving from analog stuff to digital stuff? And so, what are some of the platforms or what are some of the tools that people should be looking out for if they also want to engage in the art of storytelling to try and reach an audience in a much more meaningful way?
Um, I think obviously I think children are unique and children are different. All right, I didn't see one storytelling tool. We try to like have stories available in audio, video, and text, meaning that
Okay.
no matter the type of child you are, no matter the type of medium you liked better, we are going to like have something available for you. Well, to be honest, we did not quite find any significant difference between the tools of like story distribution because we're primarily digital anyway. So it's not like we
Yeah.
had physical books that we were selling, right? I think people just choose what they liked and what they connected with better, and I think it's generally worked out for most of them.
Yeah, so I mean, if I'm getting what you are saying, then probably the text, the what am I saying? The online version of books where you can diversify them into different media is probably even much more appealing to different sects at the same time because then I could either choose to read in text or I could listen to it in audio, I could watch it in video as well, which is
Mhm.
very meaningful. um so then that is very interesting because I've also tried to see a lot of these ebooks around, and then this would lead me to pivot into a slightly different conversation which would near us to the end. I've tried to read ebooks, but because ebooks are usually on phones, the difficulty is we easily get distracted on how to concentrate and focus on these books. So, like you're saying, they're probably efficient in terms of online reading, diversified in media at the same time to grant people their preferences. But the difficulty is also the fact that our phones and some of the tools that we use to access these platforms are very, very complicated in a way that you are reading a notification pops up, social media catches your attention, and then that's it. Do you think we are losing reading culture in the modern age? And if we are, what are some of the things we need to do to try and get that reading culture back? Because obviously, reading, per the discussion we've had, is a very, very important way. Even not just reading, in terms of following stories. Like if you're watching a video and a notification pops up, you can easily quit the same way if you are reading a book. Do you think we are struggling with our ability to concentrate and follow stories within the modern age? And if we are facing that problem, how do you recommend you as an individual or any person as an individual reader can try fix these issues?
I think what's happening actually is that we are evolving in the way we assimilate information,
Yeah.
and that's a long time reading has been seen as the primary means for which to like access information. But
Yeah.
right now, we're having the technology to de-emphasize reading and open up the experience for other people to like be able or be capable to assimilate information in like far more diverse ways. For instance, reading, for instance, is not a particularly very inclusive way of assimilating information. Tons
Yeah.
of people with eyesight issues, tons of people that can't see, and then also a lot of people that are dyslexic. They are just wired in a way that it's very, very hard for them to like read. And I think what's happening is that the world is evolving to a place where all those methods of disseminating information that were hitherto hard or impossible to be available are now available, and people are assimilating information in like much, much different ways, and that has led to a de-emphasizing the emphasization of reading right, as a primary means of receiving information.
Yeah.
I think that's a problem on one side, but then there's also the general problem of like the attention spans right now as much smaller. So it
Yeah.
doesn't matter how you assimilate information. So if you cannot pay attention for like a considerable amount of time, then you're probably not going to be able to like achieve anything within that period of time. So that's like quite another way to like look at it. Again, like all things, it's quite like a distribution of nuance in what the problem is.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of set reading goals. I was having a discussion with Erasmus recently, and then I think earlier today, and he said he usually sets a very ridiculous reading goal for himself to try and finish a huge number of books in a year, and probably doesn't finish them, but at least he improves in the number of books he reads. And then I think about some of these things, and I look at the fact that I open a book PDF, even when I'm on a flight, I open it, I try to read, and then I just see a notification pop down. I'm like, let me go follow this, and then I'm gone. Like I'm gone from that book until like 2 days later
Never
when I
to-
remember. Yeah, I remember. Oh, I was reading this book, and mind you, I'm still probably on introductory page. Nothing major about the book yet, right? So I've recently been thinking whether or not, because we're encouraging creation in the modern day where people are creating a lot, but
Mhm.
if people are creating and the most meaningful contents are not getting attention that they deserve, what is really happening to the meaning or to the content and the value that is being created and being put out there? So I get the attention span bit as well, and then the media. But do you think people, like, if I'm an individual reader and I'm asking how can I improve this? Do you think there are ways I can try and fix some of these difficulties?
Definitely, definitely. As much as I said that reading is not an inclusive skill, it's also a very important skill, right? I think most people should be able to like read, and I think it's not just about read; it's about what reading does to you as well. It's like
Yeah,
majority of the information that is still very much available in this world is available in text, right? And if you
yeah,
wanted an access to those things, you have to train yourself not only in the ability to read, but the capacity to stay and comprehend. So
yeah,
I think like most things, this are down to deliberate practice, right? So you set a small goal, you hit it, you prove to yourself that you can do a small goal, then you try and then add it up a bit, you do the same thing, and then you repeat over and over again until you are
yeah.
hitting your desired milestone. It's just simply quite possible.
That's amazing. Let's come down to some fun debate conversations. Usually there's this bigger controversy about who is the greatest of all time debater in Africa.
Mhm.
Um, I would want to pick your mind on this. So I'm going to ask two things. In your era where you debated, who would you say was the most lethal debater you ever came across? Like the person you look at and then you say, this is obviously the best debater within the generation that I'm seeing here.
Hmm. I think that would be either Karim or Prince.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Any specific reason why you narrowed down to those two?
So it just depends, right? On how like I process issues and what I've seen them do in the rounds where I've been with them or in the rounds where they've been speaking with other people and I've watched. I
Yeah,
think they are capable of coming up with like the most unique of argumentation. There is the capacity to run an argumentation that is pretty obvious and
yeah,
then be so detailed and thorough that you win. And then there's a capacity to like come up with something, insights that you did not even presume should be part of this conversation, and then it
yeah,
becomes that is something that is really, really miraculous in a conversation because it then opens up a new world of argumentation on both sides,
yeah,
and the other people did not were not even aware of like this surface of conversation. And I
yeah,
think for the people that have done it the most times in my watching, it's from both of them. I've seen that a number of times. But again, I was not like quite a well-traveled debater, so I didn't hear quite a number of other people I'm sure were also fantastic speakers as well speak.
yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, for me, I sometimes listen to Karim and I'm like, yo, how are you thinking? Like, how did we get here? Because we thought we were all having this conversation in public. Why did you pick it and then send it to heaven? Like, bring it back to earth. Let's all be able to chat about it. And it took me a
Yeah,
while because there were several instances where I'm debating in a room with Karim and I don't understand anything about what he's saying. And thank God at least now I can. So now I can think about it and then see how I process it mentally. Yeah. But you do you have any pick on who's the greatest ever African debater?
to be honest, I don't think I've listened to enough people to be able to to say for sure. To be honest, I don't think, but like I know I can say who my favorite speakers are, but the
Okay.
conversation on who the greatest African debater is out of my pay grade.
So he's out of my pay grade because usually people want to know who the greatest of all time is, and sometimes it's a very hot topic to touch. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's really been fun being within the debate space as well. Just seeing how people you just get to know what people prioritize
Hmm.
in terms of characteristics when you hear them discuss some of these issues around who is my favorite debater, who is the best debater. Like I listen to you now, and then I get a sense of you are looking, for instance, who wowed you the most, who had
Who
the
elevates the conversation?
yes, who takes the conversation to places where you get to think about something completely different from what you were expecting to think about. Some people
Yeah.
would pick who won the most trophies, right? Some people will pick who was the most difficult to beat when I met them, right? And
Hmm.
so just also tells you the things that people prioritize, the differences between them, and also just sometimes exposes us to different ways of evaluating our own sport. Because sometimes we are
Yeah.
so drawn into those who win trophies are the most successful debaters or are the best debaters. But when I just listened to what you said, I now will probably start thinking, okay, are the best debaters really those who win trophies or some of the people who are actually able to change conversations in ways that we don't expect to be changed?
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think in a lot of ways, debate is for you to learn how to think. You
yeah,
understand, and learn techniques to like analyze issues to open up worlds you didn't think exist. I think winning trophies can be very, very strategic. I don't think you particularly need to be an you don't need to introduce any new line of thinking to win a trophy. You
yeah,
just need to know how to um, how to beat people. I think those are two very, very different things. I think
yeah,
for me, when I think debates, I think about who teaches me how to look at the world in a new way, and those are
mm,
the people I usually tend to like get towards. And there are also people that teach you how to win.
yeah.
Obviously, yeah,
That's
they are so convincing that they overwhelm you with all the arguments, and then
yeah.
yeah, obviously the other guy said something that is unique, that is profound. But where does it stand compared to these seven valid things this other guy just said? Right? And I think there are those people. But for me, I like to judge by again who teaches me how to think in a new way, how to see a topic or the world in a new way. And the people that did it most consistently for me were those two.
Yeah. How have you learned to evaluate success? How do you evaluate success as an individual?
I think that's a difficult one. For me, most of my life, I've tried not to be stressed, right? So,
Okay.
obviously, for me, the first measure is maintaining that lack of stress. You understand? Like,
Okay.
not having to stress over anything. I'm not a particularly very material person. I like money, obviously, but I'm not a very material person. So it doesn't take me a lot to be comfortable. It doesn't take me a
Yeah.
lot. So for me, it's I'm not stressed. I'm healthy, and then I'm able to create as much as I want, as often as I want.
Okay. 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 Because I know people like recently we've been having a conversation about measuring success and sometimes even on an individual level it's so difficult to do that because you know you've gotten positives but you also
Mhm.
know there are negatives and sometimes trying to find the net to know what results is the result really is it success or is it failure it's sometimes so
Mhm.
difficult and you know even though it is so difficult to evaluate, we still a lot of us still hinge our self-confidence on
Mm,
that problematic evaluation. That if we view ourselves as successful, we get more fuel and confidence to pursue things in life. If we view
mhm,
ourselves as failing, we begin to doubt ourselves more and question whether the new steps we even want to take make sense. And so
mhm,
sometimes I just usually want to get a sense of how do other people beyond us evaluate success. And then if because there are a lot of people who can connect to different ways of evaluating success. And hearing
mhm.
yours now just makes me rethink a lot of things because to be fair, I may not have achieved everything I wanted to this year, but I'm probably not also struggling. And so if you balance things out and you realize you are not stressing, probably you just didn't achieve your goals, then
Yeah.
that could mean success. Then that relieves a lot of pressure on me as an individual because then I have a new way of measuring success that's now much more relatable to where I am as well. So yeah, we highlighted a few things about Flock Tech. Currently, you are a product manager where we've discussed the most fun aspects of your work.
Yeah.
Beyond these, what are you really working on now? What are you doing? What are you into? Because we usually just want to get a sense of what you are into so that if anybody also who watches this episode will want to reach out to you around any of the things that you work on, they would know that you are the guy to come to.
Okay, that's a very good question. Currently, I'm a product manager at Norbase, and essentially what we're doing is we make it possible for you to start and launch a business anywhere across Africa, essentially making Africa feel like a country. So imagine you're a businessman in Ghana, you wanted to sell to customers in Nigeria, you wanted to sell to customers in Senegal. You probably need an entity in Senegal to do that. We help you open up that entity, get it registered, get you all the licenses you need to like perform your activities and get you a bank account to get you started. Right.
Okay.
We also do things like ongoing compliance for those companies. So maybe at the end of the year, you might need to pay your taxes. You might need to like send your annual general reports and a host of other things. We help you do all those things in between as well.
That's that seems amazing. Like
Yeah.
I, I don't- wow. It seems like obvious a problem that people should find a way of solving. But
Hmm.
just hearing the problem being highlighted with such equivalent solution to it just dawned on me that like because sometimes it's so difficult in Africa to try and have international like cross country connections
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
as well. And so trying to
Yeah.
bridge that is really really important.
That's essentially what my our software does at Nobis. It makes Africa feel like a country, actually. So, essentially, if you had a business idea, instead of like the
Yeah.
markets of your home country, you have access to a market of 1 billion people because you can immediately just start anywhere you want. But not just Africa, we also allow you to open up businesses in USA, UK, Dubai, Bivia, and a couple of other global destinations. So, not
Okay.
only are you like an African citizen with your business, you can be essentially a global citizen and have bank
Oh
accounts businesses in all these other places in the world. I
yeah.
think, yeah, it's what it does is a lot because it's kind of like connects the continent in a way. It also makes businesses more resilient now because you now have branches in other African countries. If a government wakes up and shuts down the one in one country, at least you have built in the resiliency by your presence in those other markets. And we make all that process automated so you never have to bother about it. You don't have to worry about it. End of every year just automatically happens. So it's quite an exciting thing to work on.
That's cool. Is this in any way because obviously I know you've heard about the AFCTA, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement,
Yeah, yeah.
and the drive to continentally create a single market that is
Hmm.
interconnected with all its benefits. And you seem
Hmm.
to have taken the lead on the digital front,
Hmm.
creating that continental market. So, do you view a world where the AFCTA comes into being and it merging with the pretext that you've given to create a much more solid base for your firm?
Yeah, again, I think what we built was like a technology that said, okay, AFCTA is coming, but we can start tying together Africa today, right? Because
Oh,
AFCTA was supposed to like give you or unify the legal and regulatory frameworks that allows for businesses to do. And what we're saying is that, oh, today, There are different laws and there are different regulations, but you do not need to know all the laws and regulations. We are going to understand them for you. All you have to do is pay us, and then we'll get you to any African country you want to go and get you set up. And it might not even be an African country, it might be a country outside Africa. We'll get you to that country and we'll get you set up. Now, because you do not need to understand those laws, then you necessarily do not need AFCTA, because that's what AFCTA
Yeah.
was supposed to do, right? Give a uniform framework. But because now with tech, we're abstracting away those differences in regulation. We tell you
Yeah.
Francophone African country, Lusophone African country, Anglophone African country, it doesn't matter. Just come and we're going to get you set up. Because we abstract that away, I think what we do is that we bring AFCTA closer to today, right? Because right
Yeah.
now we built technology
Yeah.
that lets you immediately just tie up Africa. And then
Yeah.
maybe tomorrow they are going to come together and they are going to make a regulatory framework that will just make our work easier, right? Because then
Yeah.
we can start people at a continental scale more easier.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's really fascinating because immediately I heard that, the first thing that clicked in my mind was like sort of the goal around the AFCTA. And like you
Hmm.
said, AFCTA is still in the works, in the pipelines, probably a matter
Hmm.
of tomorrow. And so getting a way in which those same goals are materialized in the world of today is very,
Hmm.
very, very, very interesting to know, because then all the benefits that we see projected by the AFCTA when it's fully fleshed out can be still
Hmm.
fleshed out within these like platform, within the products that you have at your end
Yeah.
as well. Yeah. So finally, just want to ask you, what motivates you, Kachi? Because I see a person who is sort of adventurous in some sense, like
Hmm.
sees a problem, tries to solve it, realizes you can scale it, tries to scale it, realizes you are facing challenges, then you know when to dump down on it, know when to quit, and then pivot into something else. What motivates you? What drives you to that extent? Because for me, I just want to know what has made you who you are, in terms of the decisions that you've made, the mindset that you have, and the emotions that keep you going. What motivates you in life in general?
Um, um, for me, I think I'm bold and daring, and I've been those two things for as long as I can remember myself. So
Okay.
there has never been any point in my life where I had small dreams, and I don't know where I get it from.
Mm.
I just have been like that. But I think much more recently, for me, what I'm beginning to see is that my work is a matter of honor. It was not a matter of sustenance. It was not a matter of making a living. It was a matter of honor, right? That I was doing something that had my name on it. And because I
Yeah.
wanted my name to be perceived a certain kind of way, I had to do a particular kind of thing. So if I was going to solve a problem, like what problem will I want to solve? If I'm going to spend my time working on something, what's the amount of impact that you're able to create? And I think there's nothing more honorable than being able to like create technology that is transformative for the life of people. And
Yeah.
essentially, that's what my entire life goal has been about, right? You see the same vein in my work at Akiddie. It was about helping young children find identity in themselves. In my work in Norbe, it's about making Africa a continent, or at least making it feel like a country, right? It's not a country, but at least we get to make it feel like a country for business owners, about removing the borders from businesses. And all those things, if you look at them, are things that are going to be tremendously impactful, right? If we're correct at now based on what we do is successful, then it can double or triple the GDP of the continent, because it
Yeah.
opens up things for trades that people did not know exist or people did not know were there before. And the reason I do that kind of work is because I believe in work of honor, right? That you
Yeah.
do something to the best of your ability to help as much people as possible, and then you do it diligently and humbly, and then you go home at the end of the day. So for me, that has been my primary goal. First one is that fundamentally, as a person, I have never, I have never seen, or I've never thought little of myself.
Yeah.
I've always thought I was capable of impossible things, of big things. And trying and failing at big things never quite tested that confidence. What it just told me was that, oh, this is just not the solution. Doesn't mean you're not capable of the solution, but this is just not the solution, right?
Yeah.
So then add that to how I perceive that work should be, as something as honor, as something that is helpful, as something that is impactful. then you get the complete outlook of the kind of person I am. I do big things honorably, so or I
Yeah,
try to do it as much as I can.
yeah. I mean, for me, I've always mental freedom in recent years has been the most powerful. Not, I won't say gift because it wasn't gifted to me, but the most powerful experience I've had in terms of being able to know deep down within myself that I could think beyond whatever boundaries that people were confining themselves with and just pursue it regardless. And in some magical ways it manifests. I don't know how, but it's so refreshing just to know that when I finish school, I'm not confining myself to a specific space or to a specific expectation or to a specific career path and say, look, if you do this program, then you can only do this, or if you're an undergrad, you can only be here within the normal range of things. Where I'm just feeling like I can't think beyond these things, also because of the people I've been exposed to. And I think people like you, Kennedy, Duke, uh, BNI, when he was in Kumasi, started Washman Services, which was a laundry service that was running. And you look at the way, the diligence with which some of these people were working towards these projects and these setups that they've done. These were people who could easily fit into so many other spaces, but then they will tell you they are never confining themselves to a single space, right? And that liberated my mind in so many different ways. And I think that's essentially what I get from what you are saying as well, that you don't have a limitation on what you think you can do. And that drives you in so many different ways. Thank you very much for joining me on this episode, Kachi. It's been amazing. I just want to ask if you have any final words for our audience who are listening to you. If you have any motivation, especially for the young debaters, because a lot of them would come watch this. I don't know if you have anything to tell them in terms of what they should look out for within their debate experience, what they should be prioritizing as well.
I'll tell them to enjoy debates,
Yeah,
to try as hard as possible to master the sports,
yeah.
to stay out of politics and just try to be fair. Understand? Try to be a good person as much as you're a good debater.
Why did you highlight politics? What did politics do to you?
I think it just takes the focus away from the sports to who
Yeah,
won. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So, but yeah, just yeah, it's like it's a sport. The debates, judges make mistakes all the time. People make mistakes all the time. Speakers make mistakes all the time. You do,
yeah,
you learn, you repeat. You understand? When you've come to the end of your day in the sport, you call it a day. You go home. But just while you are here, try your best to be the best debater you can because it will really pay.
yeah. Sure. Thank you very much for that as well. Thanks everyone for joining us on this episode. It was an amazing discussion. Personally, for me, because I've sort of had a thing about storytelling since I started listening to certain speeches that Chimamanda had been given.
Mhm.
And if you go to my YouTube feed, there are several videos that talk about storytelling and what it means, what it does to the mind, and how it liberates us in so many different ways. And so, knowing that you had worked on this, you had discovered this maybe way before I did, and then you had even gone ahead to contribute to trying to solve it in various significant ways was very interesting to catch up with you on. And so, thank you very much for what you've done for Africa, what you continue to do for Africa, and also reflecting what the power of debate is creating within the African spaces in significant ways as well. So, hope we would have you here to discuss something else sometime later. But for now,
Anytime.
thanks for showing up and see
See you.
you on another episode.